In this session, we are discussing attribute list of use bin. The first attribute is the ID attribute, and the second attribute is the class attribute. The main two attributes of the bin tag is the ID and class. And next attribute is the type, scope, and bin name. So we have 5 attributes of the bin class, use bin tag, ID, class, and type attribute, and the scope attribute, and the bin name attribute. First of all, we are trying to understand what the ID attribute used. This ID attribute represents the name of the reference variable of the bin object. In the same way, suppose I have created one student object, student s equal to new student. So s is the reference variable of the student. If you want to you define use bin, how we can define GSP colon use bin and ID attribute. In the ID attribute represent name of the reference variable of the bin object. Suppose I have defined the s, it means s is the reference variable of the bin object. For which bin? That's why we are specify the class attribute. Suppose I have class attribute is the student. So by means of this ID attribute only we can access the bin in the rest of the GSP file. So once you create the bin object, how we can access the bin property? By using reference variable. So in the same way, s is the reference variable for this bin, so you can access bin property in the GSP file with the ID name, whatever ID having. Now second attribute is the class attribute. So this attribute represent fully qualified name of the Java bin class. For this class only GSP engine perform instantiations. Whatever class name you are specify, for that class GSP engine create the object, and that object will refer by this s reference. So class name, actually bin, whatever class name you are specify in class attribute, for class name only GSP engine create the object. So in the class attribute, the value of the class attribute always should be concrete class, because GSP engine create the object only for class attribute. Whatever value you are specifying, name is specified in the class attribute, for class name GSP engine create the object. So abstract class and interface are not allow value in the class attribute. Why? Because GSP engine create the object for class attribute. So actually abstract class and interface object cannot be created. So here abstract class and interface are not allowed. Bin class compulsory should contain public no argument constructor, otherwise will get instantiation problem. This attribute is optional. Whenever we are not specify the class attribute compulsory, we should specify the type attribute. Actually we have two attribute, one is the class attribute, another is the type attribute. What is the class attribute? In the class attribute specify the class name for which we GSP engine create the object. Here we specify the bin class name, bin class name. In the type attribute you can specify the type, which type, specify the type of bin. What means of the type of bin? Suppose I have class 1 person, this class is a person. I have another class student, but student class extend the persons. So now we are trying to understand. We can say student is a student type, and we can also say student is a person type. What is the student type? Student type is a person type is also. So whenever we are specify the GSP colon use bin and bin ID equal to suppose s and class name. Suppose which class you want to create the object, which class you want to create the object, in the class attribute specify that class name. I want to create the object which class? Suppose student class. And what is the type of this bin? If you want to specify the type for the bin, you can specify type of bin by using type attribute. In the type attribute you can specify the person. Yes, because bin is also person type, student is also person type. So suppose person